Hey there, my name is Brenton. I like to use the power of words to cultivate humanity. I'm super interested in how we use the ideas of history and philosophy to optimize for better humans and to ultimately create a more just and ethical world. And I'm very interested in pulling ideas from different disciplines to see how is it that we build an ethical world. And so on this channel we discuss different ideas, and then at the end I improvise on them with a little freestyle, a little verse, just to give them a little creative color. And it's all unplanned. And so diving into today, what I want to talk about is the hot button topic right now. This has been a hot button topic for a long time, which is the origin of race and class in American society, but really in societies in general. But for me, I don't really look at it in terms of like what's happening in 2020 or what happened in 1968 or even what happened in 1900. I really like to take a much more broad view in terms of looking at what are the different aspects of human nature that attribute and associate and contribute eventually to these different conceptions of the way we actually build societies in general. I spent a long time and a lot of my life really studying nation building and empire, and when you look at the scope of a nation and empire, you have to think about the different foundational pieces that make a nation or an empire a nation or empire. And so when we look at these different nation states that have existed since the dawn of humanity, we have to think about why humans have even been able to thrive and be sort of the dominant biological hegemon on Earth to begin with. And one of my favorite books that talks about this is *Sapiens*, which is an international bestseller by Yuval Noah Harari. And *Sapiens* covers a lot of things that are beyond the scope of this video. But one of the many amazing ideas in the book is this idea of myth, story, and imagined communities. And so when we think about myths and stories, when we hear the word myth, you think about, something that you read, like Gilgamesh if you were in high school, or these different myths that are in folklore, etc., etc. But I'm not talking about those kind of myths. What Harari means, and what I mean in this case, is a myth is just an idea that we both agree upon that doesn't actually tangibly exist. So what do I mean by that? So if we're part of the same nation, if we are Americans, if we are Frenchmen, if we are Congolese, if we are South Africans, we believe in the myths of what that means. So if we're Americans, we believe in the myth of, independence and revolution in 1776. We believe in the myth of manifest destiny. We believe in the story of the American dream and being able to create something better for ourselves through hard work and grit, and many other things. But if we go back to the beginning of humanity, it's this ability to believe in these imagined ideas and believe that, if you're not going to steal my property, I'm not going to steal your property. So we have these tacit agreements. And in the same way, the biggest myth of all that has allowed humanity to become the dominant species on planet Earth is money. Money is something that everyone can agree on, whether it's a green piece of paper or a purple piece of paper or a silver coin or a bronze coin. If you think about it, money doesn't actually exist. It doesn't mean anything. It's just an idea. It's an idea of how we ascribe value to something. I mean, back in the day, yes, it was pegged to gold and silver, etc., but those days are long gone. And so most actual money is physically worthless, but in terms of an idea, it's absolutely invaluable. And so these are how humanity and different human systems and human societies throughout the ages have been able to advance so quickly, is that we can build societies that have these shared myths and these shared stories. And there are many amazing books about that. I remember in college I read this amazing book called Imagined Communities, and it was about the proliferation of the printing press and how people could share and debate and have a discourse about the same ideas and the same events at the same time, which revolutionized the rapidity of human thought and really led to the societies that we have today that are extremely advanced, at least technologically speaking anyway. So going back to this idea of myth and story, myth and story have also, in many ways, communicated and defined how we look at class. And so we have to understand about power structures is when you're building a nation, you're building a nation state, building an empire, there is only one thing that power is designed to do. People might think, oh, power is designed to oppress people or subjugate people. Those might be features of power, but at the end of the day, power is only designed to do one thing. Power is designed to proliferate itself. That means that if I am the king, if I am the CEO of the company, if I am the head of the village, then what I want to do generally is make sure that I stay the head of the village, the CEO of the company, the president, etc., the king, for as long as humanly possible. And there are some systems that check against that, term limits, etc., but for the most part, that is how power has looked from a historical standpoint, is this idea of wanting to maintain itself. And even if it's not one person, it doesn't have to be one king or one queen, but that's why you have these different historical clans and dynasties. In China, you had the Qin dynasty, the Tang dynasty, the Ming dynasty, you had the Habsburg Empire in Europe, you had the Bourbons in France, and so many other dynasties, clans, lineages. Hey, even if you want to go imaginary, you had the Uchiha clan, if there are any Naruto fans out there. So this idea of passing along the power through the bloodline, so even if it's not kept by me as an individual, but it's kept by my people, this is an idea that has pervaded history since the beginning of humanity, and still pervades to this day. But now, those structures are far more complicated. Those structures are now in governments, in political parties, in different movements and ideologies. And so we've graduated from having bloodline clans to having these different ideological thought and ideological belief systems that continue to perpetuate themselves. So, if we go, let's go back in time and look at a different period in history. Let's look at the Indian caste system. And so, in India, India is a place that is absolutely just replete with natural beauty and natural resources. It's the birthplace of many spices, many teas, and so way back in the day, thousands of years ago, the Indo-Aryans who came down from the Caucasus Mountains, the Caucasus Mountain Range, basically modern-day Iran, and also the Eurasian steppe. Sort of the northern part, maybe around like modern-day Russia, Kazakhstan, etc. They came down and they migrated south. They discovered what is now modern-day India and Pakistan, and they discovered all of the amazing riches and natural resources that that land and that region has. And let me tell you, like, having been to India a couple of times, like I always say, it's God's country. It's absolutely beautiful down there. Just, resplendent natural beauty. And so these Indo-Aryans discovered all these amazing jewels and spices, and they were like, oh, we kind of like this stuff. And so we want to own these jewels and spices and different natural resources for ourselves. But the problem was the Indo-Aryans, these Eurasian peoples, they were very small in number. Whereas the native Indians of India, the native Indians, were very large in number. And so the Indo-Aryans needed a way to essentially justify how it is that, like, they could essentially assert themselves in this privileged position. And so what they started doing was essentially like making a lot of Indians indentured servants and enriching themselves, as so many explorers and conquerors do, because they had slightly more advanced technology, etc., etc. But what they had more than anything else, which is the whole point of this, is they had mythology on their side. They had belief on their side. And so they came up with this mythos of basically having a caste. So a caste is like a societal ranking where the whole idea is if you're born into sort of a predestined level. And this is not, again, unique to the Indo-Aryans in India. It was, if you look at feudalism in Europe, even feudalism in Asia, same thing. The whole idea that your destiny and your place in society is predetermined. And so the Indo-Aryans were like, okay, we're going to basically come up with this conception of the divine being. So the thing about asserting power is that you can never just assert it by saying, I say so, I'm here, and I'm powerful, and just deal with it. It's always you have to appeal to a greater authority, whether that's a god, whether that's just a divine being, whether that's nature and science and biology. But in this case, it was this idea of a divine being, that the people who were at the top were sort of cut from the head, the divine part of this godly body, and the people at the bottom were cut from the feet and the legs and the parts that were more impure, that were less important. And so when you look at the Indian caste system now, you have at the top the Brahmins, who are the priests and the holy men, the people at the top who are the most sanctified. Then you have the people at the bottom, who are the very, very bottom. The people at the bottom are the Sudra, but the people even lower than that are the untouchables. And I know untouchable sounds like it's a word that is positive. It has a positive connotation in America. Not positive per se, but it has a connotation in America of power, of like, oh, I'm untouchable. It's not like that in the Indian caste system. The untouchable is essentially a person who doesn't fit into any caste because like their worth is literally that low that they're like basically wallowing in the garbage, in the proverbial garbage heap of life, which is unfortunate. And so they were called untouchable because anybody else in any other level of the castes couldn't interact with them in any way, or it would be said that they would become impure. So the untouchable. So you have this level, this hierarchy. And where did the Indo-Aryans put themselves? Of course, they put themselves at the top. And so they didn't have to justify just by saying, oh, I think I'm the best, we think we're the best, we think we deserve these things. Now they're like, oh, there's a divine order that says this is how it is. And even long after the Indo-Aryans all either died away or their influence shrunk, these ideas persisted for thousands of years. And even to this day, the idea of castes in India, so prevalent, so pervasive. And so this is just an example of how, as Harari argues, these ideas of race and power and class and these different rankings and dynamics, they can really emerge just by chance. And this same chance, this same happenstance, is exactly what happened in America. Many thousands of years later, after the Indo-Aryans, we have the Europeans from the 16 to 1800s already have a stronghold in America. And really, even if you go back to the 1400s, that was the heyday of the Portuguese and the Spanish. And what happened to the Portuguese and Spanish is that, that period of time, like the 15th century, was a period of discovery and curiosity. We still had maps that said where there'd be dragons because people didn't know what was in Asia, what was in other parts of the world, and the map is very limited. So it's like strange because we really take that for granted that even our knowledge of the entire globe is a relatively new phenomenon. And so you had, the Marco Polos and the Columbuses, etc. of the world who were trying to discover the rest of the world, but at least discover from the European perspective. Moreover, originally, Columbus was trying to get in on that India action. He was trying to get a connection to the spice lines, etc., but he just happened to come upon the Americas. An even funny thing about the Americas, actually, why are the Americas even called the Americas?
The Americas are called the Americas because of a man named Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci led several expeditions to the Americas and was the first person to coin the term Mundus Novas, or New World, realizing that they were in fact not in Asia. And it was the cartographer Martin Waldseemüller who, in reading Amerigo's accounts and making this map, the Universalis Cosmographia, and decided to name the continent after him.
So, the Americas, Spain and Portugal lose their influence, and then the Brits and other Europeans take over, and they are the new stewards of America. And they found New York and all these other places. But actually, even funny fact about New York was actually previously New Amsterdam, because the Dutch were one of the dominant global powers for a brief spell of time in the 16th century, and then basically they got invaded by the British, and the British took it over, and now it's New York. But it very well could have been that the greatest city in the world could have been actually called New Amsterdam. So, 1600s. We're in the United States, and the Europeans have pretty much sullied their connections with the Native Americans. At first, they tried to establish power in an equitable way with the Native Americans and basically build positive rapport with them. But, you know, the Native Americans were essentially taken out by these different diseases that the Europeans largely unknowingly brought with them, and then knowingly later, which is unfortunate. And so the Europeans needed ways to assert their dominance in other ways. And so actually, in the 16 to 1800s, or in the 1600s, the Europeans actually tried to use other white indentured servants as well as like Mexican and Native American slaves. The problem was there weren't nearly enough of them. They were dying too quickly. And actually those were probably the two biggest problems. And so why did the Europeans start just importing millions of slaves from the African continent? Well, there were kind of three main factors. The first was that the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, was a part of a bigger system of slave trade. So a lot of people don't know that there was already a very active slave trade to various Arab nations and Muslim empires from the African continent for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there was already this established sort of ecosystem of slaves from the African continent, again, unfortunately, especially because I come from an African family. But that is very unfortunate, but that was indeed the case. The second reason was that there were different diseases, malaria, yellow fever, etc., that were endemic to the African continent that were brought via slaves to places like, you know, Virginia and Georgia and Brazil and Colombia. And a lot of people were dying in droves, Europeans included, because they had no immunity. Africans, being from Africa, had partial genetic immunity. And so because of that immunity, ironically, they were more appealing as slaves. And so the Europeans were like, why not use people who are not going to succumb to this illness in like one split second? And the third reason was just a geographic one. Africa was just closer to the United States. Not the United States, to the Americas in general, than say like Japan or Mongolia. And so just again, through these factors of almost a crime of convenience, the Europeans engaged and began the transatlantic slave trade. But again, just like the Indo-Aryans, you can't just say, oh, we're better because we say so. They were appealing to these higher authorities. What were these higher authorities? Well, first there was a religious authority. So many theologians argued that Africans were the descendants of Ham, who was the son of Noah, and they were like, because of that, you know, they are more apt toward being servants and slaves. That was one. But also remember that in the 16 to 1800s, especially 16 and 17, we're in the period of the Enlightenment. So ideas are everything, and discovering nature, and you have, you know, Sir Isaac Newton and Voltaire and the philosophes. And so it's all about ideas and breaking away from religion and using the empirical evidence of nature. And so, of course, it was all about science. And so they used science as a justification by saying that Africans were essentially biologically inferior. And this is where we had the pseudoscience of eugenics that was born. And so basically, you have this idea of African inferiority. You also have this idea of, you know, Africans are less intelligent, and also the ideas of purity. And purity has existed for thousands of years. That basically, if you intermingle with these untouchables, if you intermingle with the lower classes, then you will in some way taint your own bloodline, your clan, etc. And so it's the same thing here. And interestingly enough, even the medical examinations were much more akin to the way in which animals were examined at the time when they were doing medical examinations on slaves. And so that, in many ways, still influences the way persons of color are treated by the Western medical canon, especially in the United States. And so again, these ideas pervade for very, very long periods of time, and I will probably be long in the grave, and everyone watching this video will probably be long gone before these ideas truly stop taking hold, because it's probably going to take hundreds, if not thousands of years, again, unfortunately, but humanity moves very slowly. And who knows, we have AI and stuff coming, so that can get crazy as well. And so you have these ideas of appealing to these greater authorities, and that's how the Europeans and the new Americans were essentially asserting their dominance over these African slaves and indentured servants. And so again, you have this idea of getting to a land that's very rich, gold and cotton and corn, and wanting to hold on to that power by any means necessary, and wanting to assert why there are fewer of us and yet we have more power and influence. And again, remember, power is just designed to maintain and proliferate itself. That's it. So, this is our little preamble to talk about the modern day events of race in America and these different historical events that I think are becoming a bit more well known now, which is good, but that you may not know about. So we're going to talk about 3 specific events in the next parts of these videos. We're going to talk about Black Wall Street and the Tulsa race riots, the Tulsa massacre. We're going to talk about the Rosewood massacre, and we're going to talk about 1898 and the election in Wilmington, North Carolina. So 3 events that really shaped the way Black Americans and other people of color feel today, and 3 sort of hidden histories that very much reinforce these different ideas that were started again hundreds of years ago, and in certain ways thousands of years ago, that mine so deep into the identity of the human being. So before we do that, time to freestyle. We're gonna get a little improv going about these different ideas. Again, I'm just I'm pulling this up. I have not thought about this. I mean, this is all happening literally in real time. So let's pull something up here. Not a rapper, but it happened by chance. Can you come upon riches by happenstance? You come down from the Caucasus Mountains and you find gold, silver, and fountains. It's replete with energy and joy. So you need to come up with a clever ploy. You need to think to yourself, how do I maintain power? How do I be the person at the top of the tower? So you come up with myths and you come up with stories that say that I am the one who deserves the glory. It's me, it's my family, it is my clan. It's the blueprint, like an architect laying the plan. And sometimes they live in fear, the people who look up to you for thousands of years, because ideas pervade when you have it made. Because right now, yes, that's how the plans are laid. So what happens when it's just by chance? What happens when the ideas are on the lance? We don't know who is using their hands when the plantation owners are working the land, because they're shipping slaves from the African continent. They're feeling so messy and incontinent. People don't know how the system was created. And so we don't know how it's going to be cremated, how it's going to be ended, how it's going to be reimagined. But this is just crazier than we all could have imagined. So the question is, what happens next? Who is going to pass the check? Who's going to control the money? Who's going to lead us into the future? Who's going to connect humanity? Who's going to suture? Who knows? But we can go back to the past, because right now these ideas will last. So right now, I'm feeling sublime, and I'm asking you all to join me next time. We are all together. We are one crew. Come back next time and we'll see each other for part 2. See you, friends. If you like this video, you don't have to smash the like button, but do feel free to click it. And I hope to see you again soon.